it's good. It should catch you right where you're at.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on. Which one do I do first?
Okay, what you can do is, this will be first.
Okay. You just let me know. Okay.
Okay. Okay, my talk is on chapter 5 of Dominican Life. And it is a really deep chapter. It's about prayer, contemplation, meditation, all kinds of things. So, and I tried, it's 52 pages long, okay? So I tried thinking about how to make a condensed version on contemplation, which there's actually 3 sections. Okay, one on contemplation, one on mystic, and one on basically Psalms, okay? And that was too much, so I'm going to leave that to you to enjoy. So I'm going to start off with section 1, which is the traditions of the order. Okay, and I guess I'm now ready for this one to be passed out.
Both pictures and quotes?
Yeah, go ahead and, there's only 2 pictures, so you have to like pass those around. Okay, so what I've done was, while I was reading this, there were many good discussions and reflections that I thought were really valuable, but it just takes too long to read during this. So what I did was I put them here. There's traditions, the basis of our prayers, and then there's quite a few about various forms of prayer. So these are to read at your leisure. Okay, so that you will have these to reflect upon later. So I'm going to cover kind of what they mean, but you guys will have to go into them on your own time. Okay, so traditions of the order. In the early days of our order, it was a custom from the very earliest times to supplement the choral recitation of the Psalms or of the Mass with what they called private devotions. Blessed Humboldt, Romans actually called them secret prayers, okay, and holy meditations, which are slightly different, but we'll go over that later. Okay, but the idea is that each one freely lifts up his soul to God, and either on what they're reading, along with the readings or along with the Mass, or lifts up their heart and then has private petitions, okay, that are on their heart at that time, okay. So St. Dominic sent the example in these prayers of meditation. So, but he knew that God formed us of soul and body, and he didn't believe, which was actually a common thing believed at that time, that prayer can be perfect only if the soul is completely abstracted from the body. So he didn't believe that. So on the contrary, he used his bodily members as vehicles to carry it more devoutly to God. Okay, from Theodoric de Apolda, we learn of the 9 ways of prayer from his life of St. Dominic. Okay, this is a picture of him. You're probably all familiar with these. Okay, there's inclinations, prostrations, penance, genuflections, contemplation, earnest intercession, supplications, thoughtful reading, and praying on a journey. Okay, so there's a picture going around, but it doesn't have the names on it, but you have to kind of figure it out, yeah. So pass that around, there's only a couple of them. Okay, so he used his bodily members as vehicles to carry it more devoutly to God. Right? Now, St. Dominic really didn't want to show his exuberance and what he was doing. He wanted not to distract his members, but what he did was, when he was at night or alone, he would do things like genuflecting 100 times, or various other really intense forms of bodily soul prayers. But he was actually absorbed secretly by brothers who concealed themselves at night in a dark corner of the church to watch him, or if they were traveling, they were able to see him and hear him on the roads and in the houses of their hosts. So the only way we know about that, this is not something that, as far as we know, it's not something that St. Dominic taught directly, but it is something that we do have because of St. Theodore of Apollo, which in his Life of St. Dominic, he documented these. The description of it in the book is really, really nice, but I figure you guys know most of this, so I didn't do that. Okay, but in the book it shows that St. Dominic mingled his meditation with his prayer and his positions. Okay, so when he was walking alone, particularly if he was ahead of people or behind them, he prayed as he walked, and he would do out loud ejaculations, right? And he was, and the fire was kindled in his meditation. That is how he acquired the intimate acquaintance with Holy Scripture, which roused admiration and gave power to his preaching. In imitation, the friars also mingled their meditation and prayer, especially after Compline before rest. And this reading here says about how Blessed Humbert tells us that from the very beginning, okay, after Compline, they would have a half an hour or so that they would spend in meditation. Okay, so it gives you a little description of that here. Okay, so in 1505, which is 200 years later, the prayer time after Compline and at other times was regulated. It was added to the rule, and it was said to be a half an hour twice daily. No one was exempt unless traveling or ill, and anyone who missed the time was expected to make it up. And if they did miss it and didn't make it up, they forfeited the day's merits and good works of the order, which is pretty severe for that day.
Oh, the whole order.
No, that person.
Oh,
Yeah, no, for the whole order, you would
Yeah.
lose all of those benefits. Okay, so that lasted for, several centuries, and then in 1868, the rule was adjusted, and the pain of forfeit was dropped, but otherwise the rule is still in force. So Dominicans are expected to have a half an hour twice a day of meditation. Okay, and tertiaries are directed to practice mental prayer as far as they can. Okay, all right. The next thing is Dominican prayer has always retained a great freedom of procedure. Each individual spends the sacred time, the half an hour, in his or her own way, which may vary from day to day. There's never been any one method officially recommended. In section 2, we'll get to shortly, there are several general principles that will help us. Certain counsels about mistakes to be avoided, particularly with respect to what they call moral meditation, which is meditating upon the virtue of prudence. Okay, and plus measures to take and to ensure the profitable use of that silent time. St. Thomas, who formulated Dominican thought and shed so much light on it, is still the authority that we refer to. Our 2.5 hours of prayer can be spent in at least 4 exercises which have his approval and for which he has prescribed definite rules. They are private, which in this book is also called mental or secret prayer, or actually some other things occasionally. So, but anyways, that's basically what it is. Then there's religious meditation, which is different. And then there's contemplative meditation, which should flow out of either of those two types of meditations or prayer. And then there's mystical contemplation, which is infused, and so that's up to God. Private prayer is a lifting up the soul to God to ask for his help by means of a little discourse which we improvise more or less ourselves. Okay, and in this paper, under section 3, there's an example of that under the Lord's Prayer, where it's actually an example of how to improvise a prayer that you could use. It's just meant as a sample, but you can use it for anything. They use it for the Lord's Prayer because we're very familiar with that. But you could pick a collect, you can pick all kinds of different things. So it's examples, there's a couple examples there. Okay. Religious meditation is different from moral meditation, which we'll talk about. It introduces into the private prayer, so it's kind of an extension of private prayers, and it should come before the private prayers, because private prayers tend to be on petitions. Okay, so what you want to do is first you want to always make sure you're adoring God or Jesus or, meditating on the Lord first before you go into any other type of prayer. So you get prolonged reflections upon God and upon ourselves to convince us of our essential need for having recourse to God, to induce us to place ourselves under His authority, and thereby give greater religious value to our petitions for divine assistance. Okay? During religious meditation, the immediate aim of which is to bring us into religious subjection to God, will forthwith lead us on to desire simply to behold Him with love, asking nothing else, although we all know that the rest will be all added to us if we're putting Him first, right? Okay? And then from that point, our meditation, hopefully, may then become contemplative. So it's a way to get into there, so it's a good thing. Okay? In section 3, there is a long discussion on contemplative and mystic meditation, which is actually a summary of a book by St. Thomas Aquinas that you're welcome to study at length. Mystical or infused graces may prolong and intensify contemplation, to which our meditation is aspiring. Most can attain to this only in very brief acts. Okay? It's also discussed here, although it's not listed as one of the 4 recommended by St. Thomas, that the ejaculatory prayer, but it's very important throughout the day because it instills the spirit of devotion in every part of our life. And he gives a nice story, which I provided for you, where there was a saint, one of the doctors of the desert, okay, and he asked God, who is the most holy, right? I don't know why, but they always do that. And so he said, well, there's these 2 women that are much, much holier than you are, right? He's like, what? So he went to the desert, went out to these women in town, and he talked to them about their lives, and he discovered that they were doing prayers all the time, like Jesus help me, or Lord be with me, or different little sayings that they would use all day long, okay? And that kept their religious fervor at a very high degree and kept them always giving their lives to God, okay? So he started doing that in his life, which was a great aid to him, and recommended it to many others. And St. Augustine and St. Thomas have also recommended this as a way to, if you have an oven, right, and you're going to use it later on, but you have it turned off right now, and then when you go to turn it on, it's going to take a while before it warms up. And we only have a half an hour for this kind of meditation, so it's better to be already warmed up before we get to that. That's the idea. Okay, so those little stories are in there, in the paper you have. Okay, finally, and this is not because it's the least, but it's because it combines all of them. So the idea is that the Holy Rosary combines all of these different types of meditation, and it is actually really good for all souls, irrespective of their state or condition, compared with, say, contemplation, which takes a while to get to. Okay, and they also said that after Compline, they actually added this in, that half of the evening meditation could be spent in reciting the Rosary together. So some provinces, some groups would do that, and some didn't, but it was available. Okay, so let's go into section 2. Okay, the Catechism actually has a heading in it that says, prayer is a battle. Okay, so that's something that's true for us as well, and for everyone. So they say, and in the book it says, sometimes it's a spiritual combat, similar to Jacob's wrestling with the angel. So, as Dominicans, our prayer focuses on the Mass, the Rosary, meditation, the Divine Office, all the liturgies of the Church. what is it that makes our prayer truly Dominican? Okay? It must be sustained by combining solid doctrine with the liturgy of the church. They must be combined, okay? And it must be really clearly understood that that's what our goal is, that we need to combine them. So if you're doing prayer and you're using some different clever methods, which there's tons of books about to do, they didn't mention it in the book, but there's lots of them where, you know, the 5-minute prayer or something, you know, there's all kinds of special little prayers you can use. Okay, that's not going to influence or have value in our life. Okay, all sorts of the recipes for perfect prayers yield nothing of value unless our spirit is already stocked with the store of doctrine, of study, which is capable of nourishing our prayer. So if we don't really have that that study to base it on, okay, it's not going to be very valuable. It's just like reading words. It doesn't really help you because your mind is and your soul is not engaged. Okay, so daily prayers ought to be the living, spontaneous, and personal expression of a deep-seated sentiment evoked by a great thought which is very dear to us, such as the mysteries of the Rosary, which may remain the same for a long time, perhaps forever, and which illuminates and stimulates our whole life. So this paper has, I think it's 4 examples of great divine truths that the book gives you. And, you know, they're meant to be examples of meditations that you could form on your own, or you can use them as you wish. Okay? And they're only pieces of what's in the book. So if you find one that really interests you, you should go to the book directly and check it out. Okay? What I did was when I kind of, in order to fit it in, I took out some of the flowery phrases or things where they referred to something else that was in that chapter, things like that. So you'll get a fuller one if you go to the book, but it does give you the flavor of it. Okay. So the Dominican soul, more than any other, should be supplied with these grand ideas. No sooner had our Father St. Dominic called together his first sons than he took them to the feet of a master in theology. And we know what a high place in his constitutions he accords to study, placing it from the outset at the forefront of the means of our religious life. Okay? And study is necessary, but even more essential is contemplation, because our postulate is to communicate to our neighbor, to those that we're teaching, to whoever we can interest, right? The fruit of our contemplation, and to allow them to be able to contemplate too, or at least meditate. Okay. But this is a key point. Excellence in prayer is not to be obtained by stirring up a great many different ideas. Only a very limited number is necessary. I mean, look at the value of the Rosary. I mean, we have like 15 or now 20 particular things, and it's like the amount of meditation we can have on is endless. Endless. I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay? So, but you need to have the well-chosen ideas, and he actually refers to it as intellectual rumination. Okay, that you kind of like chewing the cud. You know, you get it perfectly assimilated after prolonged rumination, that they present themselves to the mind in a very simple and natural way. And I have an example in here about St. Thomas, how he did that. And another one that comes to my mind is St. Maximilian Kolbe, who, when Mary said, "I am the Immaculata," right? She didn't say, "I'm called Immaculata," or whatever, you know. She said, "I am the Immaculata." And he meditated upon that for almost 40 years. And just as the Nazis were coming to arrest him, he finished writing his description of of the fruit of his thought, and that has now become our basis for understanding that the Immaculata means that from the time of Mary's Immaculate Conception, that she was the spouse of the Holy Spirit, and that the Holy Spirit lives in her, just as the Holy Spirit does now in us. But because hers is a pure and sinless soul, it's just a really intense meshing And that's one of the reasons why people will say, well, you know, why are you saying you pray to Mary? Because, you know, she's just a person, right? She can't do that. Well, she has the Holy Spirit living in her, so she can have basically the abilities of God given to her. It's not like she can take them or anything, but she receives them, okay? And so anyway, so it's hard for people to understand. I mean, it took St. Maximilian Kolbe 40 years somewhat to come out with it, and Scott Hahn says it'll probably be hundreds of years before we incorporate what he wrote into all of our thoughts. So, but anyways, that's the idea, is that you can have a certain meditation that you ruminate on for years and keep extending on, okay? Okay, so now there's a picture of the crucifixion. Hold it up for a minute and then it'll be passed around to you. Okay, this is Friar Angelica, the crucifixion, and it's from the 1400s, 1441. Okay, and then the meditation particularly talks about the look on the face of Saint Dominic as he's below the cross and meditating upon Jesus. Okay, so it's another one of these great ideas that you can meditate upon. And you'll pass those around, and then you'll pass these out. And I have to apologize because it shows all these links in yellow, which I really urge you to go to because there's wonderful, wonderful information. But the top here, you have to type it in yourself. Sorry, I didn't have a way to do it. But you can probably go to the picture, and it'll probably give it to you. Okay.
Leslie? Leslie,
Yes.
can you email that to John so he can pass
Oh,
out
sure.
the chapter? And then you can click on the links instead of trying to copy all those.
Yeah, if you send it to me, I send it to all the chapter members, and they can just click on it.
Perfect. Okay. I'll
Thank
do
you
that.
for doing this.
Okay. Okay, now, we've talked about the importance of study. Now we're going to go to this part of liturgy. Okay? So from the very beginning, Dominicans have always combined mental prayer with liturgy. So we should supplement by mental prayer the public worship that we render to God at Mass and the Divine Office in all the Church's liturgy. The two forms of prayer should be merged together. Some people mistakenly think that we have to have meditation and liturgy separate because you want to focus on them. But as you live with the Church's calendar year and with the different readings and so forth over the 3 years and so forth, it becomes a part of you, and it frees your mind up to be able to, have little meditations that come to you as you're listening without getting away from that. So one of the dangers is that, you don't want to get off into something not related to the liturgy, okay? So when mental prayer is completely divorced from liturgy, there's a danger of it losing much of its vital value. The subjects and formularies set forth for us by the Church so lavishly and with the guarantee of orthodoxy are generally preferable to those that we find for ourselves, as we wish to be faithful to the inspiration of the Church, to participate in her offices with our spirit and with our heart, and to celebrate worthily the divine mysteries. Our first duty is to stir up within us the thoughts and the affections which correspond to the readings, the prayers, and the acts in which we are engaged. However, if we fill our souls with a different current of reflections and sentiments, we shall be divided against ourselves. Such a dualism would be detrimental to our life of prayer, as well as to our liturgical life. Both would be impoverished unless the one is subordinated to the other. So the liturgy comes first, and then the mental prayer that goes along with it as we're inspired, but it needs to be integrated. Does that make sense? It's not easy to do, but it doesn't make sense. Okay. So combining mental prayer with our vocal prayer without dualism is essential. Okay, now we get to the biggest section, which is section 3. Private prayer is basically similar to mental prayer, but it's kind of like a subset because it's focused on petitions. Okay? as Blessed Humbert described, private, or what he usually called was secret prayers, are in the strictest sense of the word petitions addressed to God and improvised with a great deal of freedom, even when based on some recognized formularity. For instance, if you're using the collect from Sunday, and it turns out that usually, St. Thomas says they usually have 4 types of prayers, okay? So you have raising your heart to God, you have thanksgiving, you have petition, you have the closing. So he says that, those are really good to use as a start to improvise a prayer. I have an example of that in there. Okay. Okay, so he says that, and this is from the very beginning, this is his reasoning in the beginning to say why this should be done. Our choral singing of the Psalms leaves us little time for dwelling upon our personal concerns. Secret prayers help us to do this. Moreover, we find it easier to open our hearts and to say what we wish privately than in the midst of an assembly. Also, for the office, we need books and often light. Nothing extraneous is required for secret prayer. It can be carried on at all times and in all places in accordance with the Master's injunction, Jesus' injunction to pray always, or pray without ceasing. Okay, the next type is holy meditation. These are the four that were recommended, 4 different types of prayer that you could use for the sacred half an hour, or you could use for other times. Holy meditation is elevation of the soul to God in order to contemplate Him, and is usually practiced in silence, so it's meant to lead into contemplation. Okay? It often causes the soul to reflect on the perfections of God and on our personal misery in order to induce us to have recourse to Him. It is also often affiliated with religious study. So a lot of times you're studying something and then a reflection will come to you. Okay? In meditation, one can mistakenly be inspired by the virtue of prudence to be overly concerned with what we ought to do to lead our lives correctly. It is this purely moral meditation that too many pious souls find themselves sidetracked from contemplation. Dominican souls, whilst not underrating moral meditation, prefer contemplative meditation in which they exercise their virtue of faith and religion, reflecting upon the divine truth in order to arrive at contemplation in a simple and peaceful vision of God. So St. Thomas asks, is moral meditation itself useful for the contemplative life? And he answers yes, despite what I just said, right? He says the moral virtues are needed to place the soul in the right disposition. It is they that impart the purity and peace without which the soul, troubled by its passions within and by the disorders which assail it from without, building upon sand, right? If you're trying to put contemplation upon a soul that's all in turmoil, right? You're just building on sand. You're not going to get there. Okay? And then it's incapable of resting in the thought of God. Thus, moral virtues help one to conquer one's passion, thus preparing the soul to rise from meditation and contemplation. To do moral meditation, we have to bring into play our practical reason and the supernatural virtue of prudence to examine the thing to do, the reasons for doing it, and the way to do it, which is what St. Thomas says. These words form a good summary of this sort of meditation, which finds favor with so many spiritual authors today. So you're going to find this in a lot of books recommended as the way to pray. Tim Gray says, at every one of his little readings, he says, now this is the resolution you should come up with, or you should always create a resolution. Well, St. Thomas is saying no. Okay. Moral meditation, its immediate outcome is a practical resolution, definite and realizable. It is with that end in view that we meditate. The question to ask, which is what separates this from the kind of meditation that St. Dominic would like us to see, is this a prayer? Does it begin with adoring God or Jesus and appeals for their aid? If not, it is not a prayer and cannot take up too much of the half an hour for mental prayer. So it really shouldn't be included in that time. But if you want to do that, you can do it separately, or he gives you another couple of ways. It is with that end in view that we meditate, all right? So if it's not a prayer, it's far better to append the practical part of such a meditation to religious meditation, okay, which we shall now describe. Okay, so if you're doing religious meditation first, then you could spend some time, small amount of time, on moral meditation and come up with a resolution. And then you could use that resolution as part of your daily examen. Okay? Okay, religious meditation is a work of the value of religion, which is directed to God himself. The meditation opens with reflections upon the plenitude of being and goodness that is God, and upon the blessings, general and particular, which he has bestowed upon us, focusing only on thoughts capable of waking devotion. Our poor human spirit needs something tangible to start with, and that is why he recommends the humanity of our Lord as the practical means of raising us to an effective knowledge of divine being. And in the quotes that I put, you go to 3, there's one about, I'm sorry, it's under section 2 still. It's under section 2. It talks about different topics that you could use for this kind of meditation. Okay? After thus having meditated upon God and bearing him in mind, we shall go on to consider our own helplessness, how our very being was drawn out of nothingness when God created the world, right? Only too easily relapsing into it through sin, okay, in the fall, and of the great need we have of our Creator and Savior in all and through all. We are indeed incapable of being self-sufficient. This meditation upon our misery, as displayed in the presence of the divine goodness. So when you're looking at the two of them together, St. Catherine of Siena said, the Lord said to her, I am he who is, and you are she who is not. Okay, so it's a quick meditation on that. Will lead us to abase ourselves before God in admiration and praise of his infinite perfections, and finally to ask him to give us his saving gifts. Our petitions will be for things that are really good if we start from that basis. Very humble, very confident, very persevering form of prayer it will be, and far more efficacious than it had not been prepared for by some form of moral meditation above. So that's why you want to put the moral meditation, if you decide you need to do that, you need to put it afterwards because you need to be in the right state. Okay? But if you do need to use moral meditation to battle passions, begin with the religious meditation and end with moral. Unlike the lengthy, okay, this is where most people do these moral meditations. It's like recommended in books and stuff. Unlike the lengthy and endlessly reiterated moral meditations, which is looking at your faults in great detail, okay? Religious meditation does not expose us to the danger of thinking too much about ourselves. Okay, so that's one of the reasons they recommend not doing it as your full time and being very careful in how you use it. Okay? Okay, and then ejaculatory prayers. Prayers throughout the day sufficient to satisfy, this is the question, are prayers throughout the day sufficient to satisfy Jesus' injunction to pray without ceasing? Because they felt that something more frequent was necessary, the Holy Fathers of the Desert made a great point of those ejaculatory prayers, which have been so praised by St. Augustine and St. Thomas. Okay, it came to the Dominicans through St. Rodolphe in France in 1630, who recommended that the 2.5 hours of mental prayer should be supplemented by frequent ejaculatory prayers throughout the day and at night. In support of this counsel, he appealed to the authority of Blessed Humbert de Romans. So that was, I don't know if it's actually incorporated in the rule, but it certainly is said to be something Dominicans should be doing. Okay. Okay. And I can believe it when I'm done. I aimed at the half an hour and it's only 35 minutes.
Perfect.
Good job. Thank
It's excellent. After the holidays, because the holidays threw me off my routine, it's been kind of a struggle to get back into a regular prayer life. What is your how do you order your day? If I can put you on the spot, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
well, I found that this is really a great help to me, because a lot of the questions that I had about prayer, just like you're saying here,
Yeah.
were answered for me, and I was finding out, like, I have a regime I do, which is prayers that I sort of read, and it made it clear to me that that's not appropriate, and that I should really be spending more time, on things like the rosary and in the liturgy of the hour and different things, so that I could really incorporate the prayer of the church into my prayer. And not that I don't do those things, but it's just, it's not the priority, so I need to change my priorities. And the other thing is that it made me feel more confident that I can put my trust in God in my prayer, rather than thinking I have to do it in my own. I'm like, up that hill, it's
Yeah.
like, so it was, so it's very helpful too in that way. So, yeah.
I ran into that quote in the catechism that prayer is a battle, and I was like, yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is. It's a full-time battle.
Yeah,
Holy cow.
and I love the image that it's like Jacob wrestling with the angel.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so,
it's good.
Okay.
I have a new habit of praying for grace to respond to the grace. So it's like, I just pray for like all of the times that I'm going to need the grace and to be able to respond to the grace, and that's been very helpful. It's
That
like,
would be helpful.
I need grace to use the grace that's given to me. Like, it's just all grace. It's all a complicated, probably not complicated, but to me, I make things complicated.
Well, in the,
And
don't feel alone, because in the miraculous medal, the picture of Mary, there were all these jewels on her hands, and some of them had lights coming off of them, some didn't. And so St. Catherine Labouré asked her, well, what's going on with these that are dark? She says, well, those are the graces that I wanted to give, and nobody asked for them.
I'm
So
asking
all of
for
us should
something.
ask for more graces.
How about the grace that nobody else wants to?
All of the grace and the ability to respond to the grace, and because that's part of my problem is responding. Like, I'm sure there's plenty just rushing right off me and not responding.
Yep.
So I'm just like, this is my problem. I need help there.
Yeah.
It's and I really
Anyways.
like the quote about, or the line about building upon sand, like
Yeah.
how to build up your virtues.
Mhm.
And it's on, if you're on, in the book, it's on page 213, 214, but it's just really important for us to have the understanding of, like, it says that to be proficient in the active life before suggesting to them contemplation. So it's like to be proficient with those virtues. One must conquer one's passions by habits of gentleness, of patience, of liberality, humility. Like all of these things that we do struggle with, right? And we go to prayer because we struggle with them, but also we have to be good at them to get higher, or more deep into our prayer life. Like it's active and passive, kind of.
And yeah, the other side of that is that when you do recognize those, or when you see that that virtue is growing in your life, you need to thank God for them, because it also says that if you don't use them or don't thank God, that He stops worried about it.
Right.
It's like not worried about it, but I mean, you stop getting as much. So
Yeah. But one of the things that I also do is the fifth decade of every rosary is dedicated to Thanksgiving for the grace.
nice.
So it's like at the end of all rosaries, it's like, thank you, Lord. Just
Yeah. So it's
nothing
nice.
else, but
It's a
thank
nice ejaculatory prayer too.
Yeah.
Say thank you, Jesus, for this grace, or thank you for this prompting, whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get tangled up because I'm like, should I thank Mary? Should I thank Jesus? Should I thank my guardian angel? Who should I be thanking? It's like I'm thanking all of you. It's like, one thing is that I think it was John gave us the book online. Okay, and so that was really helpful, because then I could go through and photocopy things and copy things and paste. And the other thing is, I had meant to put the page numbers on each of these, and it turns out that this is page 191, which is like 207 in our book. So
right,
it's like,
it's a little bit.
I didn't have time to go back and
That's
redo the pages, but
That's an original copy, so
yes.
the newer edition is,
And
I
there's some
appreciate you
things that are
saying
slightly
that,
off,
yeah.
but that's okay.
Thank
It
you.
worked good. Anyways, anybody else? Yeah.
It's more of a comment than a question. Because early on, you were talking about how some spiritual writers said that one ought to remove the soul from the body as much as possible prior to prayer, and that Dominic didn't buy that. And this, I can say that this is one thing that I've appreciated to learn. And in particular, there's times when I'm at adoration and nobody comes in, or they couldn't come in, so I'm there for a longer time. And I'll reach a point where I prayed every prayer I can think of, right? So you get, I guess the positive spin is I've achieved calmness. The negative spin is I've wanted to say At that point, I will begin to do just bow, genuflect, kneel, stand up, bow, genuflect. And I gotta say that I can infuse as much fervor and as much love of God in just doing that physical prayer as I can with all of the all of the words.
Yeah.
So so I thank Dominic for that, right? I think I never thought of that, but
It
it
actually
works.
mentions in the book a number of times that certain actions or gestures were supposed to be associated with certain prayers and stuff so that you would increase the fervor. So that's very good. I also thought about, I wish I had Mike available because he could probably tell me who these people were that said that. But I thought about looking it up, but it wasn't in the book, so I figured they're not really, emphasizing that. So, all right, good.
It's also good because it makes the pathways in the brain between the thoughts and the prayers and the physical actions, it makes them stronger.
Exactly.
So once you do those actions,